Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to have this wonderful audience for tonight's program. I extend my thanks to each and every one of you for coming and sharing your evening with us. And my special thanks also goes to Asia Society Texas Center and the East Asia Foundation in Korea and all the generous sponsors and supporters whose collective effort have made this event possible. And I think this event will be a wonderful opportunity for our community to engage in a timely dialogue on Korea-U.S. relations. For decades, Houston and Korea and Texas have maintained a close relationship. We have a quite strong economic ties and partnership in various industries, including energy, technology, medicine, to name a few. And recently, we are witnessing more and more Korean companies are coming to Texas and surrounding regions, expanding their investments, especially in oil and gas sector. Their investment includes upstream projects in West Texas and also LNG export project in Freeport and building a petrochemical complex in Lake Charles. There are, of course, many more, but I'll stop here. I think these economic activities such as these are meaningful, not only for stimulating regional economic partnership between Korea and Texas, but these are also critical for strengthening our bilateral alliance between Korea and United States, especially in the early months of Trump administration and with the new government also in Korea. Many see this as a crucial time for the Korea-U.S. relations. Each side has strong incentive for to push for stronger bilateral relations. In that sense, I think this event is an exceptional opportunity for us to promote understanding of each other and find out new policy directions of Korea's new government. So, with great pleasure, I'm honored to introduce to you two guest speakers from Korea to illuminate on security and economic issues and discuss about Korea-U.S. relations. They are my former bosses and also widely respected experts on diplomacy and trade issue back in Korea. Our first speaker is His Excellency Ambassador Sung-hwan Kim. He served as Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade from 2010 to 2013. With a diplomatic career spanning over 36 years. He dedicated many years of his career at the North American Bureau of the Ministry, who is in charge of Korea-U.S. relations. He served as a foreign minister during a very turbulent period in Korea, when North Korea bombed the South Korean island and torpedoed and sank the Korean naval vessel and conducted third nuclear test. He was at the forefront to take diplomatic measures and to mobilize international community's effort and support for the peace and security of Korean Peninsula. Furthermore, during his tenure as foreign minister, he organized G20 Seoul Summit in 2010 and Second Nuclear Security Summit in 2012 in Seoul, which significantly strengthened the global presence of Korea. After retirement, he served as chair of the Institute for Global Social Responsibility in the Seoul University. Currently, he is distinguished professor at Hanyang University's College of International Study. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome His Ambassador Sung-hwan Kim. Thank you. Our second speaker is former Trade Minister Taeho. Currently, he's a professor at the Graduate School of International Studies of Seoul National University. And he also serves as ambassador at large for international economy and trade. From 2011 to 2013, he served as Minister for Trade in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And during his term as Minister for Trade, the so-called KORUS FTA, the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, took effect in 2012. And he also led several free trade agreement negotiations with Korea's other trade partners like China, Canada, and Australia, Vietnam. I look forward to him sharing his thought-provoking perspectives on Korea-U.S. economic relations. Ladies and gentlemen, please give him a big hand. For the last but not least, I must introduce tonight's moderator, Ambassador Chase Untermeyer. Actually, I have met him for the first time today, but I had already heard many great things about you from various sources. I stop here because Alex already mentioned you. He was an ambassador for 3 years to Qatar, and he also has held, both elected and appointed office at all 4 levels of government: local, state, national, and international. And after that, you have been an international business consultant. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please give him a big hand for welcome. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please enjoy the program. And now I will hand over the floor to Ambassador Chase Untermeyer. Thank you.
Thank you, Consul General. Would like to welcome everyone formally here. This is a beautiful setting and a significant one for all programs of this magnitude. It is a compliment to Houston and to Asia Society Texas Center to have such a distinguished delegation visiting the United States to make its stop here. But then, after all, it makes sense that the Republic of Korea should come to the Republic of Texas. And we still think of ourselves as central in many ways, at least geographically, if not in terms of emotion and politics and economics. My role is very simple. It is to reintroduce these gentlemen and invite them to share some opening thoughts. And then I will ask a few questions, but after that will come your questions. We'll talk about the procedure for that. But it will be a time for all of us to take advantage of this tremendous opportunity to have 2 of the most outstanding thought leaders in Korean foreign affairs and economics with us this evening. And to begin, may I invite Ambassador Kim to the microphone for your opening remarks, sir.
Thank you.
Please.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is really my pleasure to be here in this beautiful city of Houston. This is my second visit here. About more than 20 years ago, I made a transition of my flight to Latin America. But once again, I saw this beautiful city again. And this morning, we had a round table at the Baker Institute at the Rice University. And I really appreciate Ambassador Untermeyer and Asia Society Texas to organize this evening's event. I have long been associated with Asia Society, and last year I had a seminar at the New York Center of Asia Society, and as a member of Asia Society Policy Institute, I did several programs with Policy Institute President Kevin Rudd, former Prime Minister of Australia. And today, I want to share some of my thoughts on the Korea-U.S. alliance and the recent development in North Korean nuclear and missile issues, particularly after the change of governments in Korea and in the United States. Let me start with Korea-U.S. alliance. As The Economist called some years ago, Korea is a model American ally. This is the phrase I like most. I believe the U.S. partnership with Korea is one of the great success stories of an American engagement in Asia. I also believe that the relationship between the United States and Korea from the First Republic back to 1948 onward has been evolved in a most desirable way that means donor-recipient relationship to global partnership. However, there are frictions and conflicts between the two countries and two governments experienced uncomfortable periods due to different goals and priority of policies. Sometimes contrasting styles of presidential leadership of both countries became obstacles in dealing with pending issues. In particular, the issue of how to deal with North Korea has been the most frequent source of friction between the two governments. And in recent years, China's rise and our relationship with China are posing new challenges to our alliance. And from time to time, Korea-Japan relations became the source of apprehension in the United States. Some medias now, weeks ago, reported that there could be a discord between the newly elected President Moon Jae-in and President Trump on their North Korean policies. However, I am confident that the two sides will be able to successfully coordinate with each other, given the unprecedented gravity and urgency of the North Korean nuclear and missile threats. In this regard, I'm happy to note that President Moon made it clear that he is fully committed to strengthening the Korea-U.S. alliance, and the Korea-U.S. alliance would be the foundation of the new administration's foreign policy. President Trump also emphasized that Korea and the U.S. would become not simply good allies, but truly great allies in his first telephone conversation with President Moon on May 10th. It is encouraging to see Trump administration's solid commitment to defend Korea on the occasion of a high-level visit, including Vice President Pence and Secretary of State Tillerson and Secretary of Defense Mattis to Korea. I am confident that the two governments would continue to further strengthen the Korea-U.S. alliance, not only in terms of political and military cooperation, but also in the economic, social, and cultural areas. I am sure that summit between President Trump and President Moon, scheduled at the end of this month, will provide another momentum to further strengthen our alliance. Taking this opportunity, I would like to explain the recent domestic situation regarding the deployment of a THAAD system in Korea, which some news media reported that it can be the bone of contention between the two governments. At the root of domestic controversy over the THAAD deployment is the previous government's disregard of democratic procedures while making the decision. So the Korean government is going through the required formalities while confirming democratic and procedural legitimacy of THAAD deployment. It is purely domestic procedural issue and not the alliance issue. On this issue, Korean government closely consulted with the U.S. government and made clear that there will not be any decision to reverse the deployment of THAAD. And last week, I want to quote some words by Korean National Security Advisor to the President, Ambassador Chung. He again explicitly explained that the deployment of THAAD system is the decision by the two allies, and the Korean government shall not neglect the decision just because there is a change of government. I'm sure that the new administration would move forward in accordance with the spirit of the Korea-U.S. alliance, and that the two governments will be able to reach a reasonable understanding through close consultations. And now let me turn to North Korean nuclear and missile issues. Since North Korea made its first nuclear test 11 years ago in 2006, North Korea conducted already 5 nuclear tests and made a number of short, medium, and long-range missile tests. Now they are approaching the final stage of completing miniaturization of nuclear warhead this delivery means. Furthermore, they openly made it clear that they would use these weapons, and I don't think it's just a rhetoric. North Korea's provocations and advancement of its nuclear and missile capabilities pose a grave threat to peace and security, not only on the Korean Peninsula, but in Northeast Asia and the international community as well. We need to achieve complete dismantlement of North Korea's nuclear program with a comprehensive approach. In this process, we should maintain international cooperation, and Korea and U.S. should play leading roles. Regarding North Korea's nuclear weapons capability, several institutions made estimates or assessments. In 2015, U.S. Korea Institute at the Johns Hopkins University said North Korea may have 10 to 16 nuclear weapons. And last October, Korean team comprising more than 10 security specialists, nuclear scientists, and economists introduced the interim findings of their study. In the paper, the team estimated that North Korea has up to 50 kilograms of plutonium and around 300 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. Paper said North Korea is likely to be able to build 4 to 8 small nuclear weapons every year, which means its stockpile could possibly grow to almost 80 or more by the end of 2020, while mastering means of their delivery. The RAND in California made a similar assessment 2 weeks after the Korean team that North Korea might have enough fissile materials to build 13 to 21 nuclear weapons, and it could have enough materials for 50 to 100. And in the field of delivery system, North Korea is now concentrating on the development of intercontinental ballistic missile, which is enabled to reach U.S. mainland. They are also developing the medium-range ballistic missile with a range of 3,000 to 4,000 kilometers, which can reach Guam, where U.S. military bases are stationed. Last August, they launched SLBM, which flew for about 500 kilometers. The SLBM is submarine-launched ballistic missile, maybe the same type as a medium-range ballistic missile, and one of its objectives is to secure so-called second strike capability. If North Korea's SLBMs were to achieve full combat capability, the credibility of a U.S. nuclear umbrella could be undermined. However, so long as U.S.-Korea alliance is strongly maintained and the U.S. security commitment for extended deterrence is kept, they cannot be a game changer. And the question is whether there is a solution to this challenge. North Koreans are claiming that due to hostile policy of the U.S. against North Korea, they are developing nuclear weapons to defend themselves and requested direct contact and bilateral dialogue with the United States. As to the request of North Korea, U.S. administration responded differently. When the North Korean nuclear issue first broke out in early 1990s, Clinton administration accepted North Korean request of having direct talks with the U.S. and concluded so-called agreed framework, which stipulates that in return for freeze of North Korean nuclear activities, Korean Energy Development Organization, comprising Korea, US, Japan, and EU, will construct 2 units of 100 megawatt light water nuclear reactors and provide 500,000 tons of heavy fuel oil until the completion of the construction of reactors. This agreement lasted for 8 years. But in 2002, North Korea's uranium-enriched program was revealed and this agreement became nullified. After this incident, President Bush adopted a different approach. Instead of having bilateral talks with North Korea, he chose to have a multilateral approach and established 6-party talks comprising 2 Koreas, the US, China, Japan, and Russia. After protracted negotiation, they reached an agreement in 2005 that North Korea would completely dismantle their nuclear programs and in return for that, 5 countries would provide energy and food assistance to North Korea. This agreement was different from agreed framework in 1994 in that it was complete dismantlement, while agreed framework was freeze of North Korean nuclear programs. However, this agreement was also broken by North Korea's nuclear test in 2006. Since then, international sanctions have been imposed against North Korea. Under these circumstances, President Obama pursued strategic patience, saying that unless North Korea make a promise to suspend their nuclear activities, the U.S. would not engage North Korea while continuing international sanction regime. As I just mentioned, both engagement and the sanctions failed to stop North Korean nuclear development. After North Korea's 5th nuclear test, there have been a lot of debate over how to rein in North Korea's development of weapons of mass destruction. Some scholars raise the need to restart talks, saying that international sanctions have not effectively worked in curbing North Korea's nuclear development. And others argue that offering any conciliatory gesture would do little to change North Korea's current path toward nuclear weapon state, but only solidify its resolve. It seems to me that under the current situation, best option would be policy mix of pressure and dialogue. When we look back the history of negotiation with North Korea, we get to know that North Korea does not come to serious dialogue until they feel sense of crisis. It means in order to have genuine talks on denuclearization, we need to put pressure on North Korea to move in that direction. For the time being, it is inevitable to strengthen our sanction regime and give real pains to North Korea, particularly to its leadership. But at the same time, we should make it clear that our goal lies not in sanction itself, but in changing North Korean behavior and let them come to the negotiation table for the denuclearization. In this connection, I'm happy to note that there is no daylight between our two countries, as President Trump and the new government of Korea show the same approach in dealing with North Korean nuclear issue. President Trump said he is willing to engage with the North on the right conditions while putting maximum pressure on North Korea. In implementing sanctions against North Korea, China's full participation is the key to the effective functioning of the sanctions. And it is encouraging that in recent months, China is actively participating in implementing UN sanctions after the summit between President Trump and President Xi Jinping in April in Mar-a-Lago. I believe that as Korea, US, China share common interest in denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, we can overcome differences among us. However, Korea and US should maintain continued efforts to get China on board until the final resolution of North Korean nuclear issue. I am of the view that 3 countries should prepare for the resumption of dialogue. They should discuss whether to reconvene 6-party talks or formulate new type of dialogue such as 4-party talks. They also should discuss whether to accept nuclear freeze first, then go to eventual dismantlement, or not to accept a freezing stage. In this regard, I strongly believe that regular strategic dialogue among 3 countries are very important. And before I conclude my remarks, I wish to stress again that Korea-US alliance is strong and resilient as we share not only interests but values as well. Since our liberation from the Japanese colonial rule, we have been dedicated to democracy and we believe in free people and free markets. We have transformed ourselves into a vibrant democracy based on the market economy. For the last 7 decades, those common values have been our unbreakable bond. And I have no doubt that an alliance built on shared values will far outlast an alliance based only on the cold calculation of national interest. I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Kim, in particular because you took about 90% of the questions that I was going to ask, but there still is something left. Now I'd like to invite Professor Park to address us, please.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Taeho Park, professor at Seoul National University. Actually, I served the government as trade minister for 15 months under President Lee Myung-bak, and I returned to the university, and I'm an academician as I have been so far. I thank you, Ambassador Untermeyer, and also Consul General from Korea, Mr. Kim, for kind introduction. Well, you know, I teach economics. The story often gets very boring, so please bear in mind I'll be pretty brief. I would like to join Minister Kim in thanking Asia Society Texas Center for inviting us and organizing this wonderful program. Unlike Mr. Kim, this is my first visit to Houston, and even though today is the only second day in Houston, I feel very comfortable, and I found people here very kind, like Koreans, if you know Koreans very well. And I'm a trade economist by training, so I will speak in that capacity this evening. Generally speaking, I would like to discuss the Korea-U.S. economic relations with a particular focus on Korea-U.S. FTA. We call this KOROS FTA, Korea-U.S. We call KOROS FTA. If you have any questions, maybe I will respond that in the later time. I would first like to share with you a brief history of the Korea-U.S. trade relations. Up to 1980s, the U.S. had been Korea's #1 trading nation, and Korea's trade with the United States accounted for more than 40% of Korea's total trade. However, coming into 1990s, the share of Korea's trade with the United States began to continuously decline, and it actually decreased to below 10% level in 2010. In the meantime, Korea's trade with China rapidly increased, and it had surpassed that of the United States in 2004. Looking at these trends, Korean policymakers and trade experts like me in Korea suggested that something must be done to reverse this trend. In particular, we thought that losing Korean products' market share in the most advanced and largest economy in the world, in other words, in the United States, would not be a good sign for future of the Korean economy. This was the general background when the Korean government considered pursuing an FTA with the United States in early 2000s. As we all know, the KOROS FTA officially entered into force on March the 15th, 2012. At that time, I was serving Trade Minister of Korea. The KOROS FTA has just had its 5th anniversary last March this year. Let me briefly introduce the performance of the KOROS FTA so far. First of all, we can see the share of Korea's trade with the United States has expanded from 9.5% in 2012 to 12.2% in 2016. Both the share of Korea's export to the United States and that of its import from the United States have increased. At the same time, Korean products share in the U.S. import market and U.S. product share in the Korean import market also increasing since 2012. In addition, if you see the growth rates of bilateral trade during the period from 2013 to 2016, Korea's export to U.S. grew faster than Korea's overall export to the world. Also, Korea's import from the United States showed similar pattern, except 1 year, 2013. In evaluating the KORUS FTA, I would like you to pay a special attention to the fact that the tariff rates on some products, particularly information technology related ones, such as semiconductors and smartphones, have already been zero before the KORUS FTA. Therefore, an increase in Korea's export of IT-related products to the U.S. was not actually due to the KORUS FTA. Korea's export of automobile to the United States is in a similar situation because U.S. cut of its tariff on automobile was delayed for 4 years until 2016. So an increase in Korea's export of automobile to the United States was not actually due to the KORUS FTA. However, we can find the U.S. export of numerous products to Korea showed a rapid increase for the last 5 years. U.S. automobiles, U.S. beef, U.S. cheese, cherry, and lobsters are the good examples. In any case, if we consider various aspects of bilateral trade figures, we can see that the KORUS FTA has made positive contributions to the expansion of bilateral trade compared to pre-FTA years. Regarding the bilateral trade imbalances of $20-some billion in favor of Korea, however, it would be difficult to admit that it is mainly due to the unfair structure of the KORUS FTA. As we recall, the negotiations and the ratification of the KORUS FTA had been through both the Republican and Democratic government of the United States. And the KORUS FTA was considered as the highest quality FTA among all FTAs U.S. had established by that time. Furthermore, U.S. International Trade Commission in Washington, D.C. recently reported that the KORUS FTA, in fact, made a positive contribution to the lessening of the bilateral trade imbalance between the U.S. and Korea. It is well known among economists that a number of factors, not just the nature of the FTAs, particularly the macroeconomic situations, are influencing on the trade imbalances. As we all agree that among major nations, the U.S. has been most noticeably recovering from the global financial crisis. On the other hand, Korean economy is still in recession, slowly recovering from the crisis. Therefore, there is a view that Korea's trade surplus against the United States could be the result, mainly coming from the macroeconomic situations of the two countries, not from unfair nature of the KORUS FTA. As the Korean economy shows various signs of recovery coming into this year, the bilateral trade imbalance between the two countries is expected to decrease in the coming years. Furthermore, if you look at the bilateral trade in services, the U.S. has been recording trade surpluses of more than $10 billion annually since 2011. In 2015, the U.S. bilateral service trade surplus against Korea was $14 billion. In addition, if you consider bilateral flows of foreign direct investments, Korea's direct investment to the U.S. have been continuously increasing, and the Korean firm's investment in the United States in 2016 amounted to $12.9 billion. Let me give you a few examples of the Korean firm's investment in this region. This morning, I also talked about this at the Rice University. I understand that Samsung Electronics invested $16 billion so far in Austin, Texas, and plans to invest another $5 billion in the coming years. Also, Lotte Chemical is investing $2 billion in Louisiana to establish the production facility for shale gas and oil. This is a few examples I want to mention. So I understand that these investments are greatly contributing to the job creation in the United States. With all of these elements combined, I think the KOROS FTA has played a constructive role in establishing mutually beneficial trade relations between Korea and the United States, despite the sluggish recovery of the world economy and world trade. I understand the Korean government at the moment, along with the Korean firms, has been making specific efforts to reduce the bilateral trade imbalances. For example, Korea is planning to import natural gas and oil from the United States in the coming years. And I also understand that a company called SK and Kogas, the gas producing company, preparing to import natural gas from the United States. I think the first shipment will be made next month. So this trade will grow in the future. In this regard, also it is much easier for Korea to import natural gas and oil since Korea is a U.S. FTA partner. Otherwise, many countries will have more restrictions in importing gas and oil. And regarding the various issues emerged during the implementation of the KOROS FTA, both governments have effectively resolved them through many dialogue channels established for the KOROS FTA. In fact, there are 19 KOROS-related committees and working parties, including the joint committee at the minister level. It would be very important for the new governments of the two countries to utilize these dialogue channels over many bilateral trade issues, including the reform of KOROS FTA. Vice President Pence visited Korea. He suggested maybe we need the reform of KOROS FTA. Nothing has been formally determined. However, if the U.S. officially decide to reform the KOROS FTA, I think I'm not working for the government anymore, but I understand that Korean government is willing to discuss the reform of the KOROS FTA. As to the possible reform of the KOROS FTA, my personal recommendation to the both government is to discuss about updating, not revising the whole thing, but just updating the FTA by adding some new commercial issues, such as e-commerce, competition policy, and investment rules to the KOROS FTA. Let me conclude. Considering not only trade in goods, but also in trade in services and investment flows between the two countries, the Korea-U.S. economic relations are very healthy and remain very strong with the KOROS FTA in the many years to come. I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Park, for a most unboring discussion of economic issues. I think all of us are interested in money, and that's what economics is all about. We will certainly talk about trade, investment, and other issues, but I think the political situation on the Korean Peninsula is foremost in the minds of this audience and Americans in general. While that may mean Ambassador Kim has to do most of the work, both gentlemen are encouraged to give their thoughts because they have the benefit of being private citizens and not restricted by government policy. But if I could start by asking Ambassador Kim, President Moon wants to renew the so-called sunshine policy toward North Korea. Mm-hmm. Would you remind us, please, about what that policy entailed in former times and whether this will be any more successful, you think, than it was last time?
Well, the Sunshine Policy was started by late President Kim Dae-jung, and this name was coming from a very famous Aesop fable story. And this is basically designed to bring about changes in North Korea through exchanges and cooperation with the South. So during his presidency, President Kim Dae-jung's term, as you know, Kaesong Industrial Complex, construction of that Kaesong Industrial Complex, and also Mountain Gungang tourism started. But some, particularly conservatives in Korean society, they criticize that in spite of this expansion of economic exchanges and cooperation, I mean, the military tension on the peninsula has not been eased. So people are asking to ease military tensions, not only just making exchanges and cooperation with the North. So I think if President Moon, they didn't name the policy yet. Some newspapers are saying it's a moon policy, it's not sunshine policy, but
Moonshine.
Yeah, moonshine policy, and so it should be different. And I think he should focus more on easing tensions on the Korean Peninsula, militarily, I mean. So he should make a kind of breakthrough in making the military tension easing.
Is there any indication that the government in Pyongyang wants to give him a chance to succeed?
So far, I can say both South and North Korea and governments are doing kind of war of nerves there, because Moon Jae-in government already approved some humanitarian aid programs offered by religious and the civic groups. It is totally 15 projects, but surprisingly, North Koreans, they declined all offers by these civic groups and demanded the Korean government to lift the sanctions first, then we'll come to the dialogue with the South. So it's a very strange situation. And also, they continued their missile tests. So already they made 5 tests after inauguration of President Moon. It means almost once a week. So I think under this situation, the practical choice for the Moon government is to continue its sanctions against North Korean nuclear programs while seeking dialogue with North Korea, but in the framework of sanction regime in the United Nations.
Professor Park, would you care to add thoughts to that?
Well, I'm not an expert on this issue, but both governments, especially North Korean leader, is testing the new president of Korea. Even though President Moon is more progressive kind of leader in Korea, but they don't simply accept the President Moon without any difficulties. So they are actually testing the South Korea at the moment.
Well, another question for both of you, but I'll start off with Ambassador Kim. The image that we have in the United States of North Korea is truly frightening because we are constantly led to believe that Kim Jong-un is a very irrational man, given to strange thoughts and actions. But is that truly the case? Is there some rationality in North Korea that we should appreciate?
Well, there is a different evaluation on North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Some are saying he's a lunatic, he's a crazy man, but some are using, he's not mad. He's using that kind of tactics. I mean, it's very positive evaluation on that. But we can feel that when North Korea is doing something, it is always calculated action. So they are trying to get the maximum of the situation always. So I think North Koreans, they're always thinking of their own survival. So it is, all the actions are to survive, so not to make a progress. So that's why it's very difficult to deal with North Koreans. They are always trying to read, when you say something, they want to read behind our mind, inside our minds as well. So, even though, as just Professor Bang mentioned, this government is more progressive than previous governments, but it will take some time. And as Professor Bang mentioned, they are always testing new government in the early stages. It always took place. So it will be the same pattern, I think, this time.
And by testing, meaning through military actions?
Sometimes military actions, but for example, when President Lee Myung-bak inaugurated, they came to Kaesong Industrial Complex, and if South Korea do not cooperate with us, then we'll expel all the entrepreneurs from Kaesong Industrial Complex, and like that. And also, one tourist was shot dead during the Mountain Gungang tourism. I think it was intentionally done. It's not the accident. So always they are testing. Sometimes they use these military provocations, but sometimes they make kind of oral threats like that. Yeah. We'll see how they will do. Yeah.
Well, I don't know whether he's rational or not rational, but one thing which is true is he's consistent in terms of provoking, new government of Korea, and in any cases he wants to spoil, the relationship between Korea and the United States and Korea and China. So in that kind of context, he's in a way consistent and predictable. But the ultimate goal of his tactic is to have a direct dialogue with the United States. That's the kind of thing they want to do, and they want to have some kind of guarantee from the U.S. of their own regime. But so in a way, he's quite consistent in many ways. Yes.
This raises a very key question. If that is the aim of the North, is to have direct ties with the United States, would that concern not just South Korea but the entire neighborhood to have bilateral conversations rather than six-party, four-party? Would you care to speak to that?
North Koreans, their long-standing desire is to normalize their relations with the United States. So in the year 2000, when at the end stage of President Clinton, they almost agreed to normalize their relations, and they agreed to set up their own embassy, U.S. embassy in Pyongyang and North Korean embassy in Washington, D.C. But at the last minute, it didn't take place. There are several reasons, and also Secretary Albright made a visit to Pyongyang, and they asked President Clinton to come to Pyongyang. But after President Bush was elected, President Clinton's visit was not realized, as you remember. So North Koreans, they think, as just Professor Bang mentioned, they think their allies, people think their ally is China, but they think only U.S. can guarantee their regime. It's a very strange situation. So that's why they want to have always direct talks with the United States. And their development of ICBMs, which can reach U.S. mainland, is to make U.S. to move and to talk with them. And President Bush, he thought having direct talks with North Korea is to give a reward to them, to their bad behavior. So that's why he adopted multilateral approach rather than bilateral approach. So, already just several days ago, Joseph Yoon, who is the head of six-party talks of U.S. side, he visited Pyongyang to bring back U.S. citizen who was detained in North Korea for a long time. So, North Koreans are using, or they're trying to capture or detain some U.S. citizens in the North. And using that, detained U.S. citizen to release. Anyhow, they have to contact with the U.S. government. The U.S. government also need to contact with North Korea. So we can say already in that respect, there are some contact between U.S. and North Korea. North Korean tactic is to even use that detained person to have a contact with the North.
Of course, we're told that that individual, the University of Virginia student, is in a coma and has been for a year, which suggests a severe condition of some kind. That would not improve fond thoughts toward North Korea if that proves to be the case. But your point is well taken that American citizens can be pawns in this game. It's very easy to imagine a worst-case scenario on the Korean Peninsula, a renewal of war with nuclear weapons. But let us think optimistically. What could be the best case coming out of our situation? Are there dreams, realistic dreams of a happier ending to this confrontation?
Well, if we can have unification like German, Germany, it is most desirable situation for us. But in reality, I mean, it'll take some more time to have unification of the Korean Peninsula. So, I mean, if we can have de facto unification, which means we can freely go and come and to Pyongyang and to Seoul, and we can easily exchange correspondence, then it will be the desirable situation, I think. Yeah.
In the case of economics, West Germany was well ahead of East Germany, but am I correct in imagining that the gap between the North and South in Korea is even greater? And
much bigger difference between North and South. Compared to German case, we have a much more burden. But when you say a very happy, kind of scenario, if we can control, we don't want to be united. I'm minority view, but we don't want to actually unite both Korea instantaneously. If we can control and manage, let them open with their own regime to the international community, invite the World Bank or Asia Development Bank to make some basic economic development within their own system. It's okay. It's okay to Korea. It is actually reducing the unification cost in the future. So we hope North Korean leaders change their mind, which is very difficult to expect. But if they do that, much easier, much better. In the meantime, I don't know whether ultimately how we are united, but we want to respect their regime. But please open the door so that their people should not be starving. So that's the kind of basic wish from many of the Korean people right now. Yeah.
You see, on the reunification, our young generation. When we make a survey, our young generation, they don't want unification. Because
political unification.
Yes, because they think it is a big burden for the South. Because, as just Professor Bang mentioned, this economic gap is huge between South and North Korea. So if it is united, it means South Korea should provide all financial assistance to the North. So our young generation has a different idea. But old generation like me, particularly because my parents, they are coming from the North. My father's hometown is Pyongyang. So my generation's case, maybe support for unification is higher than the division. But young generation is different.
Thank you. Would like to conclude this questioning on an economic issue, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Professor Park, you mentioned the success of the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. What effect on that agreement, or in general terms, does President Trump's withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement have?
Well, first of all, personally, President Trump withdraw its participation from TPP. I think this is a mistake. This is a really good, not the best approach, but maybe second best approach to integrate, Asia Pacific, expand the market to each other. It's a good idea, and then this TPP of 12 countries can be expanded by inviting Korea, Indonesia, Thailand, and more countries. Maybe in that way we can give a huge pressure to China to join the TPP. But simply you cannot join the TPP, automatically. You have to open up their market too. So that's a nice scenario we can think of. However, this option is gone. I hope the leaders in Washington can reconsider participating back to the TPP in the future. Maybe a couple of years they can change their mind. Right now, Japan is leading the leadership of TPP 11. In the meantime, U.S. is not part of the TPP, but the remaining 11 countries want to do something, and later they invite back the United States. But anyway, this is uncertain. But the KORUS FTA, I mentioned, I spend most time, how KORUS is working. But simply, President Trump says that U.S. has a trade imbalance, trade deficit against Korea of over $20 billion. But this is the result of the macroeconomic situation. In other words, U.S. is recovering much faster than South Korea. We are not importing as much as we want to because our economy is very sluggish. So maybe we can see more on those kind of terms rather than FTA is tilted in favor of Korea. That's not the case. I'm a kind of economist also. I'm sometimes a policymaker, but I'm basically economist, and that view is not well accepted. So we want to talk to each other. I mean, right now, U.S. government is reviewing North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA first, and then they will decide what to do. And then maybe this shows the example how the U.S. government want to do vis-a-vis other bilateral FTAs. So we'll be prepared. We are willing to talk to the United States, but I don't think we have a fundamental flaws in the agreement. As I said last part of my presentation, we may upgrade to modernize the FTA. That's fine. It's already 5 years old. We can do that.
Does Korea in any way feel affronted or even insulted by President Trump's allegation that Korea is taking advantage of the United States economically and not doing its share in its own defense?
At the beginning, we are a little bit surprised to hear that, but by now, it's okay. I mean, we're used to it. Much milder toward Korea so far. Yeah.
You see, during the campaign, his presidential campaign, President Trump, he didn't mention anything about our alliance. And he was, as you said, he attacked and criticized Korea in terms of trade. But after he assumed his presidency, he talked about importance of Korea-US alliance, as I mentioned during my presentation. He said, we really want to be truly great allies. And through the visit of Vice President Pence and also Secretary Tillerson, Secretary Mattis, they are giving solid commitment to Korean security now. So, I mean, it's okay now for us, yes.
Very good, very optimistic. We'd now like to turn to questions from the audience. I believe we have 2 microphone people here ready to leap to wherever you are. I will recognize individual, and if you will wait for the microphone to come to you, if you identify yourself, that will be fine. And of course, we encourage questions rather than counter addresses. So do we have a first question? I think Dr. Barrett right there. If you'll stand please, and we'll have a microphone.
Thank you for the presentations. I teach at University of Houston. We have our class here.
Could you speak directly into the microphone,
yes,
please?
We have a class here from University of Houston. I'm studying financial crises. I wanted to ask, please, what lessons Korea learned from the financial crisis in 1997 and how that protected it from the global recession, 2007-2009. It didn't suffer as much as Japan or Europe and the U.S. And so what lessons has Korea learned about financial policy and recession and financial cycles, keeping it one of the strongest economies in the world? So, thanks.
Can I respond?
Yes, please.
Very nice question. 1997, 1998, we had a financial crisis. But actually, it started from Thailand. And we learned from that crisis. This crisis is contagious. It can spread over other countries. At that time, Korean economy was quite strong and healthy, except one thing. The central bank doesn't have enough dollar, for example. So we are attacked by speculators. And we end up also one of the victims in East Asian financial crisis. One thing I would like to emphasize here, we learned actually from that experience. The IMF, we went to IMF for the emergency funding, and when IMF gave us help, they attached very strong conditions. Okay, to receive this help, you have to implement this kind of policies. One of them is, you can remember, tight monetary policy, which means that high interest rate. Interest rate went up from 6% to almost 20% overnight. And then another policy recommendation was tight fiscal policy, which means government should not spend money. So we had huge suffering from that conditionality, and we actually explained later, they lift up the restriction a little bit more later on, but at the beginning of that conditionality, many innocent, healthy small and medium company, even big company, fell to the bankruptcy. Because how can you stand with 20% interest rate overnight from 6%? So we have lots of suffering, but in that procedure, we have lots of restructuring of the economy. So we become much stronger in terms of defending ourselves from another crisis. Maybe that's why we can survive much better during the 2008-2009 crisis. But think about the comparison of the policy recommendation made by IMF at that time, 2008. They said you have to have a low interest rate as low as possible. And then they encourage all the government spend more money. So it's exactly opposite recommendation which they made in Asian countries in 1999, 1997. But the 2008, they have a completely different recommendations. So I think IMF should be more they have to evaluate each country for their own kind of situation, rather than one size fits all kind of policies. I think they also learn from East Asian crisis. But through that, we are much better. But we are still struggling from recession.
Question here, please.
Thank you. I'm Gene Fagelson. This is the third seminar I've been in with Ambassador Untermeyer this year already, and he is an expert on so many different topics. We love him. Us Navy boys stick together. Okay, my question basically is the impact of the People's Republic of China. We see some quixotic behavior with them in the last 6 months to a year, and even presently, and from the two different aspects you gentlemen are concerned with. What is going on with that, and what influence do they have on Northern Korea?
Yes, so just can you? Because
I think the question was, what influence does China, Beijing, have on North Korea, and what might prove to be the difficulties in getting Chinese assistance in solving that problem?
China used to be the sole ally of North Korea. I mean, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and North's dependence in terms of economy on China is almost more than 80%. So China has leverage if they want, and they want to decide to exercise that leverage. But China is very reluctant to use that leverage against North Korea because, I mean, the first reason is they are afraid of refugees when something happens on the Korean Peninsula. Millions of North Koreans will come to China. And the second one is in relation with the United States, they always want to have kind of buffer zone. So now North Korea can be a buffer to China. So that's why if you imagine that Korea is united and the U.S. troops are stationing still there in Korea, then they can, in theory, they can reach up to Yalu River. So it is, I mean, Chinese, they want to imagine that kind of scenario.
Happened once?
Yeah, it happened only once, yeah. So Chinese are very reluctant to exercise their leverage, as I said. But I don't know exact background, but after the summit between President Trump and Xi Jinping, China is more actively exercising and actively participating in the implementing sanctions against North Korea. So just according to the newspaper, Secretary Tillerson mentioned he will talk with China on the suspension of oil supply to North Korea even. So this is lifeline. So if that happens, North Korea will feel real sense of crisis, and they may come to dialogue with us.
Something you mentioned we read, which is that China fears in a collapse of North Korea a great outflow of people across the border, creating a great refugee crisis. But is that realistic? You would think that China can control that border.
I think so, because people are talking about collapse of the regime in North. But I think so long as the leadership of the North Korea can maintain their solidarity and they can be united, I think their regime can continue, they can survive. Because all the bureaucrats and the military personnel, they think if united, then there's no place for them. So now the only choice for them is to unite and just support Kim family's regime there to survive.
Yeah, just briefly.
Yes.
I'm not really expert on this issue, but China is also in dilemma because China, the unification or lots of flow of immigrants, but also they don't like North Korea to have nuclear weapon. That's for sure. So that's why they are in dilemma. So it depends on future behavior of North Korean leaders. Maybe China will be really irritated. Then I don't know what will happen. But at the moment, they are in very much in dilemma. Yeah.
Yes, a question here for Mr. An.
As you know, President Moon is going to meet with Donald Trump. One of the questions is about missile defense that's in Korea. There are 2 now in operation. 4 has been delayed by President Moon's so-called environmental study. At the same time, China now would like to inspect U.S. weapon. Of course, China do not want that missile to be in South Korea. Of course, as an ambassador, I've been 36 years of experience. How would you advise President Moon when he's discussing this issue with Donald Trump?
I think already there are some suggestions for that. And as I said during my presentation, Korean government made it clear that they have no intention to reverse the decision. And as you mentioned, this one battery composed of expanded radar plus 6 launchers. And 2 launchers are already there and the radar. They are already in operational mode. So the problem is, the previous government, when they made a decision to deploy the SAD system in Korea, according to our current administration, they didn't keep the rules and regulations of Korea. So they are now want to have kind of formalities and according to the explanation from the Blue House, senior secretary to the president, they want to make legitimate of this SAD deployment through this kind of process. Because in the democratic country, without having required process, how can you do that? That's what they think. So my advice to the president is, it's already consulted with the United States, and at the working level, they are closely consulting. So, I don't advise to have this as an agenda item of the summit. So delete from the agenda. Yeah, that's my advice.
Oh, is there a final question someplace from anybody? Well, I guess I get to ask the final question. Yes, well, I defer to this gentleman, and that will be our last question. You'll stand, please, and the microphone is almost at you.
Thank you. Getting back to China, now you mentioned that they would prefer that North Korea does not have nuclear weapons. It occurs to me that in the 1980s, with Deng Xiaoping taking control and China turning its back on the hardcore communist policies, well, North Korea probably started to realize that less and less they would be able to rely on China. Now, South Korea could always rely on the United States as a deterrent against North Korea. vis-a-vis, North Korea could count on China as its own deterrent against the United States in invading. Would it be conceivable that North Korea probably realized that China was going to start turning its back on them, and that's probably what prompted them to double down on their nuclear weapons program?
I don't think North Koreans, they will think if something happens, China will help them. Because even though they have a treaty between China and North Korea, I think that treaty is now, we can say, moribund. So North Koreans, that's why North Korea is developing their own nuclear and missile programs. And when I meet with my Chinese friends, as you know, North Korean missile, it's very difficult for them to reach mainly in the U.S. But it's easy to reach China. So you have to resolve this issue. And just a week ago, we had a seminar with the Chinese Pangur Institute for a whole day. And they frankly told us that we made a misjudgment. We underestimated the capability of North Korean missile and the nuclear capability. So now China, they fully understand the situation, and that's why even there is some kind of agreement between President Xi and President Trump. China themselves, they understand how serious that issue is there.
Well, I want to thank both these distinguished gentlemen for a most exciting and informative evening, and we thank you for coming and gracing Houston by your presence here.
Thank you. Thank you.